Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlicker shills, debt slicers, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks. I'm Useful Idiot. Welcome. And let's go back to these Wikileaks stories. And I agree with this one article that says that one of the biggest WikiLeaks scandals is not being talked about that much because it doesn't involve necessarily Hillary Clinton per se, although it does because these are exchanges once again between Hillary Clinton and John Podesta. And but what this points out is probably one of the more disturbing things I've seen in here. And once again, no surprise. We know this kind of stuff's going on. We know this stuff went on during this particular election, and there's no surprise. But just to get the confirmation of it is always nice. And then you get to be disturbed about it all over again, thinking about it. But here we have a case where Michael Froman, at the time an executive at Citigroup, in 2008 wrote an email to John Podesta titled lists. And Podesta at the time was the co-chairman of Obama's transition team into the White House. And the email was even sent not only from Michael Froman, at the time an executive of Citigroup, but the email was sent from a Citigroup address. So they were not trying to hide the fact that this information was coming from a well-placed bank executive at a well-placed bank. And speaking of which could be a better placed bank than Citigroup, one of the main offenders and tragedies during the 2007-2008 collapse. And here they are in the middle of essentially helping to assemble what became the Obama administration. And so they supplied three lists, and it seems to be kind of unclear. These lists were supplied, and it's implied that they were unsolicited. But the fact that the lists were supplied kind of implies that it was okay and understood, and not necessarily completely and wholly unsolicited. But anyway, three lists were handed over: a list of women for top administration jobs, a list of non-white candidates for top administration jobs, and then a sample of 31 cabinet level positions. So, of course, the obvious thing right off the bat is the fact that we get this supposed rainbow diverse administration coming into office, the Obama administration. And of course, the first thing they want to do is establish this unprecedented record for bringing in minorities into the government. So a list of women and non-whites were all assembled so that they could choose from that pool and not necessarily the most qualified people for the jobs. But that said, that's a side issue in this case, because what I want to focus in on here is this sample of 31 cabinet level positions. And granted, there's 31 suggestions, and it doesn't necessarily mean that Citigroup and a Citigroup executive and people at Citigroup were dictating who would go into the Obama administration specifically. But one has to look at the fact that it's not that hard for someone in this position, for example, a bank executive at Citigroup, to hand a list to somebody who's involved in Obama's transition team, and then all of a sudden all those people magically show up on these lists, but also in the Obama administration. And the connection is just too beyond coincidental, particularly when you look at how many people ended up being chosen. Eric Holder was on this list for Justice Department, Janet Napolitano for Homeland Security, Robert Gates for Department of Defense, Rahm Emanuel for Chief of Staff, Peter Orszag for Budget Office, Arnie Duncan for Education, Eric Shinseki for Veteran Affairs, Kathleen Sebelius for Health and Human Services, and Melody Barnes for Domestic Policy Council, among many others. And of course, a couple of those are fairly notable. I mean, somebody as high up as Rahm Emanuel for Chief of Staff is interesting inclusion. But the main one, of course, being Eric Holder, and that being Citigroup, knowing full well that Eric Holder had a previous experience defending banker crimes at his old law firm. And then he has returned, Eric Holder has since returned to the law firm that defends these same banker scum. So very notable in that case that Citigroup would get exactly the kind of attorney general who would not persecute any bankers. And Eric Holder, of course, for 8 years did not pursue any bankers. And then the other notable one on the list, of course, is the Treasury Secretary, and of course Robert Rubin, Larry Summers, and Timothy Geithner all would have been fine, and for the most part, certainly they're interchangeable as far as their policies, and would have been perfect for Obama administration as well. We would end up with the same kind of neoliberal policies we ended up with. But Timothy Geithner, of course, probably being the best choice, being the most malleable, and once again, somebody who they once knew that would work with all the big banks, as would Robert Rubin and Larry Summers to a certain extent. So anyway, there's a great WikiLeaks story, one of my favorite ones so far, that basically shows that for all practical purposes, the banks are well placed to choose who is going to go into the next presidential administration. And why not? They give a lot of money to these campaigns, and they're very powerful. And I'd certainly like to see similar memos surface from the likes of J.P. Morgan and Bank of America and all the rest, because I'm sure they've got people they want in these positions as well. Who knows? They may collude all together and come up with this list, and then have one bank submit it, like Citigroup, because as it turns out, all the banks are colluding together, and that's going to be my next video about all of the Wall Street banks getting together and discussing issues just like that. So, boy, what a surprise. We have bankers who basically choose who's going to go into the next presidential administration. And we certainly know if Hillary Clinton gets elected, there's going to be lots of too big to fail banker representation in our government yet again. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too?